I never thought grief could have a smell, but the morning after my grandmother's funeral, the whole house seemed steeped in butter and old sugar. It clung to the curtains, the floorboards, the chipped porcelain mugs that had outlived 3 generations of Thompsons. Every breath I took reminded me of her. Gloria Monroe, the woman who taught me how to stir love into batter without saying a word. I stood in her kitchen in Maple Hollow, Vermont, still wearing the black dress I'd worn the day before, my hair pulled into a careless bun. The late October light came through the gingham curtains, painting stripes across the counter where Grandma and I had once rolled out pie dough on Sunday mornings. The cutting board still bore faint scars from her favorite knife. And right there on the shelf, half hidden behind a jar of dried lavender, was her recipe book. It wasn't much to look at. The leather was cracked, the spine half gone, pages curling at the corners. But to me, it was a living thing, a journal of sugar, salt, and secrets. I reached for it with both hands, half expecting it to hum. When I opened the cover, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon rose like a ghost. Inside, her handwriting ran in neat, looping cursive. Apple butter cake. Add lemon zest if the weather's warm. Little notes like that, tucked between ingredients, as if the weather and mood were as important as flour and eggs. And on the bottom of one page, for Claire someday, when she's ready. My throat tightened. I traced my finger along her name, written in the margin of the first page, Gloria M. Monroe, 1957. Every recipe had a story. The molasses cookies for the first snow, the cornbread that kept us fed when your grandpa lost the mill job, the pie that got me my first kiss. It wasn't just a cookbook. It was her life in chapters of sugar and sweat. I sat down at the kitchen table and kept reading until the light shifted toward afternoon. I'd lost track of time when my mother's voice broke through the quiet. "So that's where you've been hiding," she said from the doorway, her heels clicking against the tile. I looked up. Linda Thompson, still polished even in grief, her blonde hair was perfectly set, lipstick unbothered. She wore a silk blouse under her morning jacket, a diamond pendant glinting against her throat. She'd always had a way of making sorrow look expensive. "I was just looking through Grandma's things," I said softly. Her eyes flicked to the book. "That old thing, Lord, I remember her writing in it all the time. You'd think she was guarding the nation's top secret instead of a pie recipe." "It's more than that," I said, closing it gently. "She left it to me." Mom tilted her head. "Oh, did she say that?" "She didn't have to. She wrote my name in it." I turned it around to show her the note. "For Claire someday, when she's ready." She gave a small, dismissive laugh. "You always were her favorite. You know, she used to make me feel like I was just the help in her own kitchen." I didn't answer. The air between us tightened, as it always did when Grandma's name came up. My mother had never liked being second best in anyone's eyes. "Well," she said finally, smoothing the hem of her jacket, "we'll sort through everything tomorrow. The lawyer said the estate paperwork is simple enough. The house will probably go to both of us." Both. That word stung. My grandmother had always said the house stays with the baker, and I was the only one who still baked. My mother's idea of cooking was ordering from the bistro on Main and pretending the soufflé was hers. "I'm not sure I'll stay here long," I said, just to fill the silence. "I have my job in Boston." She raised an eyebrow. "Still working at that little cafe? Honey, at some point, you've got to think bigger." That tone again. The one that said you're small, you're sentimental, and that's why you'll always be behind me. I smiled tightly. "Bigger isn't always better, Mom." Her lips parted like she might say something sharper, but then she sighed. "We'll talk later. There's a casserole in the fridge. Don't let it go to waste." After she left, I sat back down, staring at the recipe book. I wasn't hungry. I was full of something else, an ache that felt like homesickness, though I was already home. That night, I slept in Grandma's old room. The quilt still smelled faintly of lavender and clean air. I dreamed of her hands, wrinkled, gentle, always dusted with flour. She used to hum while she baked, that old tune from the 1940s, "I'll be seeing you." I woke up with the melody still looping in my head. The next morning, I walked to the edge of town where the bakery sign still hung faded and crooked. Monroe's Bakes and Goods. The shop had closed 5 years ago when Grandma's arthritis got too bad. The windows were dusty, but I could still see the old glass counter and the chalkboard menu behind it. I pressed my hand to the glass. I wish you could see this, Grandma, I whispered. I wish you could tell me what to do next. Inside my tote bag, the recipe book felt like a heartbeat. That evening, the lawyer came by, Mr. Kavanaugh, a kindly man who'd known my grandmother for decades. We sat at the dining table, papers spread out between us. My mother arrived late, as usual, trailing the scent of Chanel and self-importance. Mr. Kavanaugh adjusted his glasses. Gloria's will was straightforward. The house jointly to Linda and Claire, the savings divided evenly, and personal effects, well, that's where she left a few specific notes. Mom leaned forward. Such as, she wrote here, he said, flipping a page, my recipe book to my granddaughter Claire, my silver mixing bowl to Linda. May you both remember that love, like dough, needs warmth to rise. I smiled before I could stop myself. My mother's expression didn't change, but a small pulse twitched in her jaw. Well, that's sweet, she said through her teeth. I suppose we'll honor it. The lawyer nodded. That's all, really. Your grandmother was a practical woman. After he left, I turned toward my mother. She wanted me to have the book, Mom. I know you don't care about. Oh, don't start, she cut in, voice brittle. It's fine. Keep it. I have no use for dusty old recipes. I'm thinking of turning the house into a bed and breakfast anyway. Something with a little sophistication. Grandma would hate that. Grandma's gone. The words hit like a slap. I wanted to argue, to say that Gloria wasn't gone. Not really. That she lived in every margin note and cinnamon stain. But I knew it wouldn't matter. My mother had never understood legacy unless it came with applause. Instead, I gathered the recipe book and went upstairs, closing my door behind me. I sat cross-legged on the bed, the book open in front of me, and read until the room blurred. Over the next week, I stayed in the house longer than I'd planned. I baked, mostly, old recipes, testing whether my hands could still remember what hers had taught them. Peach cobbler, molasses cookies, pecan pie. The kitchen came alive again, the way it used to when I was little, and Grandma would sing to the radio while I stirred batter in a too-big bowl. The neighbors began stopping by when they smelled the sugar. Mrs. Riley from next door brought over a tin of coffee beans and said, "Smells like the old days, Claire." I smiled and poured her a cup. She cried when she tasted the pie. One afternoon, I found a note tucked into the back of the recipe book. Paper yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. It wasn't a recipe. It was a letter. My sweet girl, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where even the best pie crust can't follow. Remember this, Claire. Recipes are stories. They hold our hands long after we're gone. Share them when you're ready, but never let anyone take your name off the story. Love, Grandma. I pressed the paper to my chest. Tears came fast and quiet. That night, for the first time in months, I baked just for me. A small lemon cake with cream cheese frosting. I sat at the kitchen table alone, fork in hand, staring at the swirls of icing and the flicker of candlelight on the wall. I thought about legacy, about how easily it could be stolen or rewritten. I didn't know then how literal that thought would become. A few days later, I woke early and found my mother in the kitchen. She was standing by the counter, coffee steaming in one hand, her phone in the other. The recipe book was open beside her, I said, blinking sleep away. "What are you doing with that?" She didn't look up right away. "Just reading. These are quite something, you know. Very marketable." Marketable? She finally turned to me with a smile too sweet to trust. "Don't get defensive. I was just thinking, it's a shame all these recipes are sitting in an attic when they could be shared with the world. There's a publisher in Burlington I know through a friend." "Wait, you're not serious." "Why not? Gloria's cookbook, a family legacy. It could even help fund the renovations for the B&B. I took a step forward. "She didn't write them for you to sell, Mom." "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, rolling her eyes. "Family belongs to everyone. Besides, you're not doing anything with them." My hands clenched around the counter's edge. She gave them to me. Yes, I remember the will. But don't you think Grandma would have wanted her recipes to reach people? You're being sentimental. She'd have wanted them to be honest. Mom gave a short laugh. "Honesty doesn't sell, darling. Stories do, and I happen to know how to tell a good one." There it was, the spark of ambition behind her calm exterior. I'd seen it before when she tried to claim Grandma's apple pie recipe as her own at a local fair years ago. Grandma had laughed it off then, but now she wasn't here to stop her. "I'm serious, Mom," I said quietly. Don't do this. She smiled and took a sip of her coffee. You'll thank me later. And just like that, she left the room, recipe book tucked under her arm. I stood frozen, heart pounding. I should have stopped her right then. But part of me thought she wouldn't actually go through with it. She wouldn't take something so sacred and twist it for money. I was wrong. That was the morning I lost my grandmother's book. The morning the smell of butter and sugar turned sour. The morning revenge started to rise, slow and certain, like dough under a warm towel. The house felt emptier after my mother left that morning, though I could still smell her perfume in the hallway, sharp and floral like a disguise. I tried to convince myself she'd only borrowed the recipe book, that she'd bring it back after showing it off to a friend. But deep down, I knew better. My mother didn't borrow. She claimed. The next few days passed in a haze. I spent hours wandering the kitchen, looking at the counter where the book used to sit. Every time I baked, I felt off balance, like trying to dance with one shoe missing. I could remember some of the recipes, the rhythm of them, the way Grandma had said, "You'll know it's right when the batter sighs." But I couldn't stop thinking about that leather spine in my mother's hands, the casual way she tucked it under her arm as if it belonged to her. On the fourth day I called her. She answered on speaker, her voice breezy. "Claire, darling, you sound tense. Everything all right?" "Where's Grandma's book?" I asked. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said with a little laugh. "You make it sound like I stole the crown jewels. It's safe. I took it into town." "Why?" "I told you, I have a contact, Julia Brandt. She works with Northline Press. She loved the idea when I mentioned it. A family legacy cookbook, stories behind the food, photos of Grandma. It could be beautiful." I sank into a chair. "You showed it to a publisher?" "Don't be dramatic. Julia just wants to see if there's enough material. She said we might need to edit for readability. Gloria's handwriting is impossible. She didn't write it for readers, Mom. She wrote it for us." A pause. Then, that clipped tone she always used when she thought I was being childish. "Claire, you're too sentimental for your own good. These are family recipes. You don't own them." "Yes, I do," I said quietly. "She left them to me." "Oh, stop it." Her voice hardened. "You're not the only one who lost her, you know. She was my mother. If I want to honor her, I will. By putting your name on her work, by sharing her legacy, and maybe including some of my own touches. You can't copyright flour and sugar, sweetheart." I gripped the phone tighter. "If you publish that book, Mom, You'll what? Sue me?" Her laughter was sharp, brittle as spun sugar. "You can't afford that, Claire. You never could." The line went dead. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and cried until the candles melted low. Grief had turned into something else now. Not sharp, but slow and smoldering, like an ember under ash. The kind of hurt that doesn't fade until you do something about it. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak in the old house sounded like her footsteps. Every shadow on the wall looked like my grandmother's silhouette, watching, waiting. Finally, around midnight, I opened my laptop and started typing. Not a letter to my mother, not an email to a lawyer, a list. Things Grandma taught me, by heart. The smell of yeast tells you when dough is alive. Never rush butter. It needs patience, like people. Family recipes are meant to be shared, not stolen. The secret to her apple pie, a pinch of salt before sugar. And finally, when someone takes what's yours, bake something better. I sat there staring at that last line. Bake something better. The next morning, I drove into town. Maple Hollow was small, just a few blocks of shops, a diner, a post office, and an empty storefront that used to be a florist's. The for lease sign in the window tilted crookedly, as if the building had given up. I parked in front of it and stood there for a long time, hands in my pockets, staring at the sunlight bouncing off the dusty glass. I could almost see it. A counter lined with pies, the smell of cinnamon and coffee drifting out the door, a chalkboard menu like Grandma's old one. I could even hear her humming. Maybe revenge didn't have to be cruel. Maybe it could be delicious. A week later, I drove to Burlington on impulse. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. A bookstore window filled with glossy cookbooks, the Vermont table, simple comforts, a taste of home. I went inside, picked one up, and flipped through the pages. Dedications, acknowledgments, names in print. I wanted to see Gloria Monroe there someday, not under someone else's story. On my way out, I saw a stack of flyers on the counter. Northline Press, New Voices in Culinary Writing. My mother hadn't been lying. That was her publisher. I took a flyer and left. Back home, the tension between us simmered like a pot left unattended. She'd been staying in the guest room upstairs while managing estate affairs, though I suspected she just didn't want to drive back and forth to Burlington. Every day she made more calls, talked about brand concepts and recipe photography, and every night she locked her bedroom door. On the third night, I knocked. "What now?" She said through the door, her voice muffled. "I just want to talk." The door opened an inch. "About what?" "The book. Please, Mom, don't do this." She sighed, pushing the door open wider. The room smelled like her perfume and printer ink. The recipe book was on the bed, open, pages marked with sticky notes. My chest tightened. "Listen," she said, softening her voice like she always did when she wanted me to back down. "This could be good for both of us. I can credit you as culinary consultant, if that's what you want." "Credit me?" I stepped closer. "For my grandmother's recipes?" "Oh, don't make this about ownership. She taught both of us, didn't she? She taught you how to frost a cake. She taught me what it meant to bake one." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're so pure because you bake for feelings instead of profit. But you're naive, Claire. Legacy means nothing if no one remembers it. I'm the one making sure they do." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "You're making sure they remember you." The air between us snapped. For a moment, I saw her mask slip, the little girl fear that had lived behind her vanity all her life. Then she straightened her shoulders, smoothing the expression away. "I have a meeting in Burlington next week," she said coldly. "Julia wants sample chapters. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Then she closed the door. Click. Lock. I didn't speak to her for 3 days after that. I spent the time baking again, but this time with a purpose. I tried to remember every measurement, every trick Grandma had whispered over the years. The dough spoke to me like it used to. Even without the book, my hands knew what to do. Mrs. Riley came by again, followed by 2 more neighbors when they smelled the cinnamon rolls. I handed out samples from the porch, and they left smiling, promising to tell their friends. That's when an idea began to take shape, small and dangerous and sweet. I could rebuild it. From memory, from heart. If she wanted to take the recipes, I'd take the story. A few evenings later, I was sitting on the porch steps when Mason Lee pulled up in his old Ford. He was a familiar face from high school, tall, easy smile, now a local journalist for the Maple Hollow Gazette. We hadn't seen each other in years. "Hey, stranger," he said, walking up the path. "Heard there's been some serious baking happening around here." I smiled faintly. Word travels fast in small towns. "Faster than you think." He looked at me for a moment, the way people do when they can tell something's wrong but don't want to pry. "How's your mom holding up?" I laughed softly. "Ambitious as ever." "That bad, huh?" "Let's just say she's trying to rewrite family history." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to talk about it?" I hesitated, then nodded. We sat on the porch as the sun went down, the crickets starting their night chorus. I told him everything about the recipe book, the publisher, the betrayal. When I finished, he leaned back and whistled low. "Damn, that's cold." "She says family belongs to everyone." "Yeah," he said, "but credit still belongs to the one who earns it." He glanced toward the window, where a plate of still warm muffins sat cooling. "These yours?" "Peach crumble muffins. Grandma's recipe." He took one, broke it in half, and grinned. "You could open a bakery with these." "I was thinking about it," I said slowly. "Something small, maybe temporary. A pop-up." His eyes lit up. "If you do, I'll write you up in the Gazette. People love a legacy story." I laughed. "I'm not sure I'm ready for publicity." "You don't need to be. Just tell the truth." The truth. It sounded like the first real ingredient in months. The next morning, my mother left for Burlington, suitcase in hand, heels clicking down the walkway like punctuation marks. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile. "It's going to be a long day." After she drove off, I went to her room. I told myself it was wrong, even as I turned the doorknob. But the door was unlocked now, and curiosity outweighed guilt. The recipe book was gone. Of course it was. But on the nightstand sat a folder. Inside were printed drafts labeled A Culinary Life by Linda Thompson. The first page made my stomach twist. Dedication. For my mother, Gloria, who taught me that love is best served warm. Foreword by Linda Thompson. These recipes have been passed down through generations of my family. Each one tells my story. My story. She'd written me out completely. I closed the folder and set it back exactly where it was. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing hard. For years, I'd let her define me, her soft-hearted daughter, the one who'd rather bake than compete. But Grandma hadn't raised me to stay quiet. She'd raised me to rise. That afternoon, I called Mason. "Remember that pop-up bakery idea?" I said. He laughed. "You're really doing it?" "I'm really doing it." "What's it called?" I looked down at my hands. Flour-dusted, steady, familiar. Gloria's hands. That night, I drove to the old florist shop and peered through the window again. I could almost hear Grandma's laugh echo in the dusty air. "Guess we're baking something better," I whispered. Outside, the autumn wind carried the scent of fallen apples and distant wood smoke. Inside me, something new was rising. Not just anger anymore, but purpose. I didn't know exactly how I'd beat her. I just knew I would. I didn't sleep the night after the fight. The house felt hollow, stripped of something sacred. Every corner smelled faintly of flour and loss. I kept expecting to hear Grandma's voice or the sound of her pen scratching in that old book. But the silence pressed in, thick and cruel. By morning, my mother was gone. The only trace of her was a faint perfume lingering near the door and the absence of the recipe book from my desk. For 2 days, I searched. I tore through every drawer, every cabinet, even the attic. I knew she had taken it. And yet, seeing the empty space where it used to be felt what worse than any confirmation. Then, on the third morning, I saw the post online. Linda Thompson, a name too familiar, smiling in a crisp photo with the publisher's logo beside her. The caption announced a new cookbook in development, A Culinary Life, Recipes and Memories from a Family Kitchen. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. She had done it. When I finally confronted her over the phone, she didn't even sound ashamed. "Family belongs to everyone, Claire," she said calmly. "You think you can keep Gloria to yourself? You left, remember?" I stayed. I took care of her. It wasn't about who stayed. It wasn't about who left. It was about the truth. About the small handwriting in the margins of every recipe, the notes that said add a little cinnamon for comfort or make this for Claire when she's sad. Those weren't for the world. They were ours. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with an empty notebook and closed my eyes. I tried to remember. I thought of Grandma's hands, the way they moved when she kneaded dough or sprinkled sugar, her voice humming quietly as if the recipes themselves were songs. And then slowly the words began to come. Buttermilk pie. 2 cups flour, half a cup sugar, 1 tablespoon vinegar for brightness. Apple crumble. 3 kinds of apples, not 2. She always said balance matters, sweet for memory, tart for truth. I wrote until dawn. By sunrise, flour dust covered the counter, the sink, even my face. My notebook was half full. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. The next week, I rented a tiny storefront at the edge of town. It used to be a flower shop, the kind that sold daisies and hope in small brown pots. The rent was cheap, and the front windows faced the sunrise. I scrubbed the counters, painted the walls, and hung a wooden sign that said Gloria's Hands. No logo, no flourish, just her name. The first morning, I baked 6 pies and a batch of blueberry muffins. By noon, they were gone. People I hadn't seen since high school came in to ask if I was really Gloria's granddaughter. They told stories about her, how she used to bring pecan cookies to the church fair, how she once stayed up all night baking after a neighbor's husband passed away. Every story felt like a thread weaving her back into the town. Soon, people started coming not just to eat, but to remember. They'd linger at the counter, telling me about their grandmothers, their family recipes, the taste of something they thought they'd forgotten. I listened, smiling, adding small notes in my book after each conversation. That's when Mason stopped by. He'd heard from someone at the newspaper that I was running a pop-up bakery inspired by my grandmother. He grinned when he saw the crowd and the line spilling out the door. I wiped flour from my cheek and rolled my eyes at him. "You're going to want to sit down for this story," he said, setting his recorder on the counter. And so I told him everything. From the day I found the cookbook to the day my mother took it, and every ache in between. He listened without interrupting, his face soft, his eyes steady. When I finished, he nodded slowly. That's not just a story about food, he said. That's about love and truth. He wrote an article called The Taste of Memory that ran in the Maple Hollow Gazette. By the next weekend, Gloria's hands had more customers than I could handle. Local news stations came by. Bloggers wrote about the bakery born from loss and courage. People wanted to know about Gloria, not Linda. I started printing small cards to place beside each pastry. They had little stories written on them. Things like Gloria's apple crumble, made for neighbors who lost someone, shared with whoever needed comfort most. Or chocolate chess pie, her favorite. She said chocolate forgives everything if you let it melt slow enough. Customers read the stories and smiled. Some cried. Some asked if I'd ever sell the recipes. I told them maybe one day. Then the tide began to turn. A week later, Mason showed me an email from one of his contacts in Burlington. Word was spreading. The publisher had received hundreds of messages from readers asking whether A Culinary Life was really written by Linda Thompson. Some even linked Mason's article and photos from the bakery. The story was unraveling. One morning, I found a letter slipped under the bakery door. It was from my mother. The handwriting was neat, but the words trembled. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to keep her alive somehow. The world listens to names it already knows, Claire. You think they would have listened to you? I folded the letter and tucked it into Grandma's apron pocket, the one I wore every day. Maybe she was right. Maybe the world didn't listen, but it was listening now. And it wasn't because of fame or titles. It was because of truth and sugar and hands that remembered how to love. That night, I baked an extra pie and set it on the windowsill. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the cold air. I imagined Grandma sitting across from me, smiling that quiet, knowing smile of hers. You did it right, she would have said. You let the recipe rise again. I didn't answer out loud. I didn't need to. The warmth from the oven said enough. The bakery lights glowed late into the night, and outside, the sign shone faintly under the street lamp. Gloria's hands, baked from memory, served with love. And though the world outside was cold, inside everything was golden. The snow kept falling for 3 days straight, blanketing Maple Hollow in white. From the bakery window, it looked like someone had sifted sugar across the town. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cinnamon, yeast, and something deeper, belonging. Each morning, the ovens hummed to life before dawn, and by the time the doors opened, the line already curved down the block. It had been a month since everything began, and Gloria's Hands was now the heart of town. People came from nearby cities just to taste the pies or hear the story. Every time I placed a slice in front of someone, I said her name softly under my breath. Gloria Monroe, my grandmother, the woman who had written love into flour. But no matter how warm it got inside the bakery, a cold thread of unfinished business stayed curled at the back of my heart. My mother. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. The silence was its own kind of noise, echoing through every quiet hour after closing. Then, one gray morning, Mason walked in with snow still clinging to his coat. He looked half excited, half serious, carrying his laptop like something fragile. He told me to sit down. Then he showed me a headline from Vermont Today. Publisher halts cookbook deal amid authorship dispute. The article explained that Northline Press had suspended the release of A Culinary Life after readers raised questions about originality and ownership. Anonymous sources claimed the recipes were taken from a private family collection. I read it slowly. The words blurred a little, but I could still see through the tears. It was happening. The truth was finally louder than the lie. Mason closed the laptop and studied my face. I didn't know what to say. I just exhaled, long and shaky. It felt like unclenching a fist I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. He smiled softly and told me that sometimes doing the right thing takes time, that I hadn't needed to fight dirty just to stay true. I looked down at my hands, flour on the palms, sugar under the nails, and thought of Grandma's words. Good recipes can't be rushed. Maybe justice works the same way. The next morning, a familiar black Lexus pulled up outside the bakery. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. Then the bell over the door rang, and there she was, my mother, Linda Thompson. The woman who once taught me how to tie an apron now looked out of place amid the warmth and chatter. She wore her pride like armor, her sunglasses like a shield. People turned to look. Maple Hollow had manners, but not much subtlety. I motioned her toward the back. The air between us felt heavy, like steam that wouldn't rise. When the door shut behind us, she spoke first. Her voice was sharp around the edges, but brittle underneath. Well, she said, you've made quite a name for yourself. I met her eyes. Not for myself, for Grandma. She gave a thin, practiced smile. You humiliated me. You have no idea how it feels to have your name dragged through the mud. I felt something old and raw spark inside me. Do you have any idea how it feels to have your legacy stolen? She turned away, jaw tight. I wanted to honor her, she said quietly. No, you wanted to be her. The words came out steady, even, but they hung in the air like truth often does. Too simple, too undeniable. Outside, I could hear the clatter of plates, the soft laughter of customers, the hum of the bakery's life. Inside, it was just the two of us, the smell of cooling bread, and everything we hadn't said for years. You could have just asked, I said. We could have done it together. She let out a sound between a laugh and a sigh. You'd never have agreed, I would have, if it meant telling the truth. She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes were tired. Her hands shook slightly. She said the publisher dropped her. No one wanted to touch the book now. Her reputation was ruined. I told her it would survive. She always found a way to make people forget. Then she asked what I would do next. Bake pies until the world forgets me too? Maybe, I said, but they'll remember her. For a moment, something in her expression softened. She whispered that I sounded just like Gloria. I told her I hoped so. She left after that. No drama, no shouting, just the sound of the bell and the faint smell of her perfume fading into the air. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small after she walked away. I felt whole. Winter passed, and the bakery grew even busier. People came not just to eat, but to share. They told me stories about their own grandmothers, their own recipes. They left notes pinned to the wall, each one a fragment of memory. I started calling it the recipe wall. Mason's article spread farther than either of us expected. Regional papers picked it up. Then a national magazine ran a piece about the bakery that turned grief into legacy. Orders poured in. One day, a woman from Northline Press came by. She carried a small leather-bound book in her hands. She told me Linda had returned it. Said it belonged to me. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. The cover was soft and cracked, the edges stained with butter and thyme. Grandma's handwriting, curling across every page, filled the air like a scent I'd never forgotten. I whispered thank you, though I wasn't sure if I meant it for the woman, my mother, or the universe. That night, I sat at the same table where Grandma used to write. The recipe book lay open in front of me, turned to a familiar page. A note written years ago caught the light. For Claire someday, when she's ready. I ran my fingers over the ink, my chest swelling with something that wasn't quite sadness anymore. I smiled. Guess I'm ready now. By spring, the bakery became permanent. No more pop-up, no more uncertainty. The town declared March 14th Gloria Monroe Day. We gave out free pie and coffee and played old records on the porch. People laughed. Some cried. Mason filmed the whole thing for a local documentary. When he finally put the camera down, he brought me a slice of lemon cake and asked if I'd ever thought of writing my own cookbook. I told him maybe one day. Then I reached under the counter and pulled out a new notebook. Clean pages, smooth leather cover, the first few lines already written in my own hand. He smiled and said it looked like a sequel. I told him it was a continuation. Same recipes, same love, new stories. He asked if I'd publish it. I said someday, when I'm ready. By summer, Gloria's Hands wasn't just a bakery, it was a community. People dropped off handwritten recipes to add to the wall. Cookies, soups, breads, all scrawled on scraps of paper or torn envelopes. I hung each one up under a sign that said, every recipe has a story. What's yours? Sometimes, when the shop was quiet, I'd close early and sit out back near the lilac bushes. The air smelled like memory. I'd open Grandma's book and read until the words blurred into the twilight. I liked to imagine her there beside me, humming softly, nodding with pride. Mason stopped by one evening with a newspaper tucked under his arm. He handed it to me with a grin. On the front page was a photo of the bakery at sunset. The headline said, Gloria's Hands, the bakery that turned family feud into legacy. I laughed, and he told me drama sells, but heart keeps people reading. We sat outside, watching the light fade. Then he mentioned that my mother had sold the house and was moving south, starting over. I stared out at the street, the sign glowing faintly in the dusk. Maybe that's good, I said. He asked if I'd call her. I told him not yet. Maybe someday, when we can talk like real people instead of roles we've been playing too long. He nodded. You'll know when you're ready. That night, after he left, I stayed alone in the bakery. The ovens were quiet, the lights dim. I pulled out Grandma's book and set it next to my new one. Old and new, past and future, both open, both waiting. On the last page of her book, written in faded blue ink, was a note I had never noticed before. Love isn't measured in teaspoons, Claire. It's in the hands that keep baking, even when the recipe changes. I pressed my hand over the words, palm fitting perfectly where hers must have rested decades ago. I whispered a thank you that no one but the night could hear. Then I opened my new notebook and wrote a dedication. For Gloria Monroe, whose recipes taught me that justice doesn't always need to burn. Sometimes it can rise. Outside, the streetlight flickered over the sign. Gloria's hands, baked from memory, served with love. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the cool evening. The snow had melted, leaving the scent of lilac in the air. For the first time since she passed, I didn't feel like something was missing. I felt full.